Hey investors, thank you so much for joining me for my liability mitigation for investors webinar recording. We had a bit of a technical issue at the beginning of the webinar, so I'm just going to do this quick video intro for you. So when you join the webinar in progress, you'll know what's going on. So this webinar originally took place on Monday, September 13th. We had a great turnout and we had some awesome guests. So stay tuned. I'm sure you'll really enjoy. There was a lot of great info shared. Just to give you a bit of an introduction, my name is Elizabeth Kelly. I have been a real estate investor for 15 years. I am also a real estate coach, and I was an elite trainer for Rich Dad, and I have a property management company in Kirkland Lake, Ontario. It is my pleasure to host these webinars once a month. This webinar, our guests were Milena Cardinal. She is a real estate lawyer in Cornwall, Ontario, and she is able to serve clients anywhere in Ontario because she's one of the very first lawyers to have embraced the concept of going virtual during COVID, which is awesome because she's doing closings for me here in Kirkland Lake and I don't even have to leave my office, which I love. Our other guest that is joining us is Michael Switzer, and Michael has been an experienced litigation lawyer for years and years, started his own practice of Switzer litigation, and he has a bit of a reputation for being pretty fierce. So it was absolutely a pleasure to have Michael and Milena join me this evening. During the course of the webinar, you're going to hear a number of different ways that we as investors can protect ourselves from liability. And hopefully you're going to take as many notes as I did, because this was an awesome one. And it's definitely I'm going to make some changes in my business models. So the questions that we were digging into tonight are, what is the biggest source of liability for an investor? What are the other potential sources of liability for an investor? So we'll cover obviously the biggest one, but what other ones should we be looking at and preparing ourselves for? What is the best way an investor can protect themselves from liability? How much protection does a corporation actually provide for an investor? When should an investor incorporate? And what should I do if I get served legal papers? So we'll be joining the webinar already in progress. The very first question that I asked the speakers, I threw them a bit of a curveball and I said, tell us about a funny story or something funny that's happened, during your term as a lawyer, because I like to loosen things up a bit, and lawyers always have great stories. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the rest of the webinar already in progress.
In Brighton. And so on this particular Friday night, there was a number of the members of the local community were gathered there. This young man saw his ex-girlfriend in the parking lot, asked the father of the former girlfriend if he could have a word with her. He said yes. So he went to see her. They got into a bit of a heated discussion, and the father sort of broke up the conversations and sent him away. He was very angry as a result of being sent away, got into his pickup truck, of course, no less, and promptly drove his pickup truck over the girlfriend's father in the Tim Hortons parking lot because he was so mad at him. And in the process, ended up actually breaking his leg. Fortunately, his leg was a prosthetic leg. He had one prosthetic leg, so broke his prosthetic, which is probably good because that's easier to fix than a real leg. But anyway, the father ended up suing Tim Hortons. Now, you may say, well, what in the world does Tim Hortons have to do with the situation? Well, Tim Hortons is the occupier of the parking lot. It has an obligation to keep people who attend on the premises safe, even from the actions of others, even intentional actions. And the argument was there should have been a security guard on duty. The staff should have been keeping a closer eye out for what was going on in the parking lot, and should have summoned the police when things started to get out of hand. So Tim Hortons was sued. I defended the case. Ultimately, we got the father to discontinue the claim, not take it any further, which we were pleased about. But in the process, at the end of the case, I served the young man with a writ of trespass, which says you can never go on to any property in the Tim Hortons system anywhere in Canada or the US again. And he was devastated by this because he says, well, how do I get my Tim Hortons coffee? I said, well, you can send somebody else to get it, but you can't get it yourself anymore, you know? So he was very upset because that put an end to hanging out at Tim Hortons on Friday night. So he did ask, you know, could I send somebody else to get the coffee? I said, yes, they can go and get it for you and deliver it to you off premises, but you can't go on any Tim Hortons properties again. We don't want troublemakers like you know, on the property causing these types of problems. So the moral of the story, and I'm sure I could tell you stories about burned coffee cases, foreign objects in the food, all kinds of different things. The point is that when you have money, which you do, and if you're an owner of property, you are a target, even for the actions of others, even for ridiculous cases such as the ones I've just described. You do become a target, and so you need to take steps to protect yourself against those types of cases, even though they're frivolous. In the end, even though Tim Hortons paid nothing on the claim, my bill was not cheap to get to that point. It took a lot of work to get them convinced to finally walk away on the case. So, and that kind of money doesn't get recovered. So that's my story.
Yeah. Wow. That is something. That is absolutely something. And what a fluke that the guy had a prosthetic leg already and that it wasn't. That's crazy. Milena, how about you? Do you have a story that would be beneficial for the real estate investors to hear? And while you're thinking a little bit more about that, one thing I want to highlight is, as real estate investors, whether we have a lot of properties or whether we have one property, the perception is out there in the minds of the tenants that we must be rich. There is very much a mindset that if you own more than just your single family home, then you must have lots of money. And it doesn't matter what you drive or what you sacrifice to get what you have. The perception is that you must be rich. So it's very much something that it's good to prepare in advance for. Milena?
Yeah,
Sorry?
Just to comment on that, Elizabeth, you're right. And you know, people today feel entitled to many things. I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm talking about. People feel entitled. And people do think more like Americans think in terms of, you know, slip and fall, I'm going to sue, car accident, I'm going to sue. People do think that way nowadays. These are some of the first thoughts that come to mind after these accidents. You know, people are very different today than, you know, our grandparents who wouldn't think of such things. Nowadays, it's seen as a great opportunity. Sorry, Milena, go ahead.
That's all good. I don't have the fantastic stories that you have, Michael. I just don't. My stories tend to be a little bit more boring. I'm trying to think. Maybe I'll tell a story as an investor rather than as a lawyer. We have a tenant who really likes to complain and find reasons to say that we are terrible landlords, of course. And in the last year, he must have brought up the fact that there's mold in his property at least like 8 times. We send someone over, he's like, no, it's dirt. The guy's just a slob. So, you know, his walls are dirty. It's not mold. And so, you know, anybody keeps bringing it back up. And finally, the last time, I was like, okay, well, you know what? If it's that big of a problem and it's causing you health issues and whatnot, we're going to need to open the walls, which is actually really toxic for you. So you're going to need to vacate the property. Oh, no, it's not that bad. It's actually really not that bad. It's just a few specks. I'll just wash them. It's all good, right? Because then, you know, he doesn't want to leave. So, yeah, and it's no matter how much you try to be a good person and how much you try to be a good landlord and do everything you can, I mean, people can sue you for all kinds of reasons. Actually, there is something else I can tell you.
Sorry, Milena, just can you lean closer? Sorry, you just faded out. We're having trouble hearing. There we go. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh no, it's my setup. That's the problem. We realized that tonight. So one of the things I wanted to say is that I have a lot of clients that will ask me, you know, what do I need to do to make sure I don't get sued, right? That contractor drafting for me, it's going to make sure I don't, or you review the property like you're sure I'm not going to get sued. It's like we can never guarantee you're not going to get sued because somebody could sue me for having purple hair. The question is, would they win, right? And that's where we come in to try to really mitigate the possibility of someone else winning. But ultimately, the reality is people sue for all kinds of reasons, whether legitimate or not. So you can never protect yourself from being sued. You can only protect yourself from the negative consequences of that as much as possible anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely. And I appreciate you reminding reminding us of all of that, Milena. Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is mitigating risk. We're not able to erase it completely. It's why we have insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with that being said, let's talk about the biggest source of liability for an investor. And the reason why we have Milena on as the real estate sort of lawyer, and then we have Michael on as the litigation lawyer, is because I wanted to make sure we are offering two perspectives, so that we were always keeping in mind, what do we do sort of as a standard practice as investors, and then, what could we do that's a step above and beyond that, which is really where Michael and his expertise comes in. So Milena, do you want to start with that one, or shall we let's start with that one, because we'll get you to sort of cover, the basics of what we do as an investor, and then Michael will take it, I think, to the next level.
Well, I do think that the question of the biggest source of liability, that's more Michael's purview.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, what I'll say about that is, in fact, sometimes as lawyers, we do give other advice other than just legal advice. And when Milena and I were talking about this topic, we agreed, and I'm sure any other investors out there who have gone through a bad tenant will also agree with this. Actually, the biggest thing that you can do to protect yourself is to vet your tenants well. The tenant is probably the biggest problem in the whole thing. It's like somebody once said to me, customer service would be great if it wasn't for the customers. And, it's probably the same with the real estate investing if it wasn't for the tenants, but they're kind of a necessary evil. And, vetting your tenants beforehand is a huge risk management factor. And so Milena will tell you a bit about some of the things that she does to vet her tenants, but you've got to be careful on your tenants, because a good tenant is a good risk, in terms of being sued. In other words, less likely to sue. They're a good risk in terms of when it comes to getting paid. They're a good risk in terms of when it comes to leaving your property in good shape. A good tenant makes the job so much better and the investment so much better. So getting a good tenant is really key. Now, there's not a foolproof system to ensure you never get a problematic tenant, but there are some very straightforward and simple techniques that you can use, processes that you can use to really vet the tenants well and really improve the quality of tenant that you get. Milena?
Yeah, so well, actually, Elizabeth was a key person in helping me draft a really good lease. I mean, we all know we have to use the standard lease, but we drafted an addendum to the lease that is I think it's pretty hardcore and at the same time, like, written in relatively plain English as much as we could anyway. And I think that has really propelled us to getting better tenants. I've noticed since we've been using this lease, it's made a big difference, because I think tenants realize we're serious, and we tend to get tenants that are grateful for those kinds of landlords, right? Rather than tenants who are looking for the landlords that they can take for a ride, because they know that we're going to take it seriously. It also translates some of the liability to the tenant in the way that it's drafted. So, for example, one of the items, and this was another friend of ours who recommended it, and I thought it was a brilliant idea, was we put a clause that we don't allow open flames. We know people will light up candles. We know they will, but if you have it in the lease that says you're not allowed to have open flames, then it helps if there's a fire to say, hey, like we said, no open flames, right? So there's like little things like that we added to kind of try to curb that. And then also the vetting process. I mean, we are very thorough. We will go through social media, and we're working to try to to create a relationship with a company that does some like credit checking. I'll dive deep with the references. We also, separate from the references, we also ask for previous landlord, and they may not give us the previous landlord as a reference, but sometimes they do, and that's fine. I like that, right? If they're giving me their last landlord as a reference, that says a lot. But I'll give you an example. We had a a tenant that had applied for one of our properties. And so the tenant's name, for argument's sake, was, say, John Smith. And they had put as their last landlord someone called Jim Adams, for instance. Not true names, obviously. And so what I did is I dug into the title of the property. Now I can do this for like $1. So I'm happy to do it for any of my clients who are real estate investors. They can call me and just give me the name to verify title to a property. It really doesn't cost me anything to do that. So I'm always happy to do it. So I looked it up and I was able to discover that the owner's name was Jim Smith. And I was like, well, that's a little coincidental. The first name of the last landlord and the last name of the tenant, the potential tenant. So then I went on Canada 411. Sure enough, sorry, I'm getting confused with my names here, but Jim Smith, who was the name of the owner of the property, was the same phone number as Jim Adams. So what the guy did was he gave his father's name because he was a young tenant and he didn't have a previous landlord. And instead of being honest about that, he lied and tried to pass his parents as his actual landlord. So he didn't pass, right? So we try to be as thorough as possible. That makes a big difference, I find, in the quality of tenants. Another thing is we've been converting our properties to high-end units. So every time we have a turnaround, we will completely renovate. And we felt like we didn't have a choice because when we had lower end properties, not that we have really low end properties, but when we had units that were not quite as nice, we would tend to get less desirable tenants. So that's kind of a choice that we've made. It's really unfortunate because I feel like a lot of families that are like low income could benefit from having, units that are more affordable for them, but not with us as landlords because we were just so tired of being, having our properties destroyed and having to fumigate properties or units when tenants left, or complaints between tenants, or whatever that meant. So yes, I agree with Michael that a bad tenant is the highest possible source of liability.
So call it, checking their employment, checking with their previous landlord, doing a quick check on social media. These things don't take a lot of time, but they can be very insightful into who you're dealing with to see. And generally people who are liars on their application, they don't just lie in one area, they usually lie in other areas, and you can verify that by making a few calls. A little bit of time, I know we're all very busy and we don't necessarily want to spend the time doing that, but it can save a ton of money if you avoid the bad tenant. So that was the first thing we came up with. But beyond that, in the more traditional liability sense, Elizabeth, I could tell you that second only to motor vehicle accidents, slip and fall claims are the most common type of personal injury claim that's brought in and I've had cases in every courthouse in Ontario. They're very, very common. And so they are common. And so there are steps that we can take to help address those. And so that's what we'll talk about now. And one of the ways to really do that is, first of all, if you have a property where you're renting out the entire, it's like a townhouse or a garden home or a single family home, in your lease, you want to make the tenant responsible for the winter maintenance. So if they slip and fall on their own property, they can't sue you because they're responsible for doing it. You also want to have a hold harmless clause in there that says if anybody slips and falls on the property, that the tenant will hold you harmless for it. In other words, if you get sued as the landlord, you then third party in the tenant, and the tenant has to pay for anything that may flow from that lawsuit. That makes them responsible. Also, you want to have a clause that mandates them to have, and this isn't just for a single family home, garden home, or townhome, but always have a tenant. They must have tenant's insurance with liability, because that way, again, if they've done something wrong attributed to the loss, you can sue them to get recuperated any loss that you have through that tenant's insurance. So it's not just suing a tenant with their personal assets, but you've got their insurance policy to respond to protect that hold harmless clause and that indemnification clause for any liability that happens while it's under their watch. As far as multi-unit buildings, of course, that's a bit different because you can't make the tenant hold you harmless if they slip and fall on a common area in that unit. But, so put in a good winter maintenance contractor to do it. charge a little bit more to the client maybe, and pay a bit more for it, but have a good winter maintenance contractor there that's conscientious in doing the job. If the hazard doesn't exist, you're not going to have the falls as much. So that will reduce the lawsuits against you, which will reduce your insurance premiums because you're not having all the claims. And have somebody keep an eye on these guys, whether it's your property manager or whoever, but make sure they are watching these guys to make sure that they are out there clearing the sidewalks and salting and sanding and doing what they need to in the parking lots, and have a good contract in place with them that mandates them to be out there doing these things on a regular basis. Nowadays, what has happened is the law has evolved such that, commercial operators, whether it's Tim Hortons or whether it's you who has multiple tenants in a single building, they want to see, okay, well, what is your maintenance protocol? What is your inspection protocol? If you can show that you have a good inspection and maintenance protocol in place, that's how you can defeat a claim, because you've done the right thing. You don't have to ensure the premises is perfectly safe. You have to show that you have a system in place to keep it well maintained for winter and to keep it inspected on a regular basis. So encourage your tenants. If there is not proper sanding, salting, and plowing and shoveling being done, say call the property manager. We want to know about it. Call me. I want to know about it. I want to know if you're dissatisfied with that work, because I'm going to get on it, because we want to make sure that you've got a good quality of service there. So believe me, they will keep an eye out and watch for those things, and they will report complaints. They love to complain. They'll happily tell you, and then in turn you go to the contractor and say, look, we're getting complaints. You've got to keep this place safe. You've got to meet the requirements under the contract to keep it salted and sanded, to check it on a regular basis, and to get that snow cleared out of the way when snow events happen. So yes, so hold harmless clauses, mandating tenants to have their own liability insurance, and that they have to provide you with a copy of that policy every year when it renews, having you or your company as a named insured under the policy. So I'm John Doe, the tenant, but also as a named insured under the policy is my landlord, so that you are protected under their policy, for which you pay nothing. They're paying for that policy for you. And yeah, I'll hand over to you in a sec, Milena. And then those, make sure you've got a good maintenance and inspection procedure in place for winter maintenance, and that somebody's keeping an eye on it to make sure that it's getting fulfilled. If you do those things and you can show to a court that you've done those things, you can escape liability even if there is a slip and fall. And you're much more likely to get sued in those circumstances. Milena.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Michael, when you said that the landlord can be co-insured, could the landlord be listed as first loss payee instead?
No, because really the primary reason for the tenant's insurance is to protect the tenant from legal liability and also the tenant's contents. But the idea is that by being an additional insured under the policy, if it does occur on the property, it would help in that particular case. But no, it wouldn't be that way, because the landlord would never be paid under the policy. Generally, if it's a slip and fall, it would be the victim that would be paid in that particular circumstances. And the other thing that these policies help with, if your tenant does set the place on fire through their liability, your insurer will be able to subrogate against the tenant's policy. So your insurer will pay to rebuild your building and put it back into the condition it was before the fire. But then it can go after the tenant to get the money back, because they were the negligent person, or one of their guests was the negligent person that started the fire in the first place. So your insurance company gets made whole through subrogation. And the underwriting department at the insurance company, seeing that, will maybe not hold that claim as an at-fault claim against you on your history, so that your premiums don't jump up right away, or that you become uninsurable if there's been a couple of bad events at your property. So that's the other advantage to ensuring the tenants have that insurance. And the tenant, what happens if the tenant's dishwasher leaks down into the unit below? well, you're going to get sued because it's your building. You can go after the tenant for that leaky dishwasher. So it's not just fires, it's floods and water escape, incidents in the parking lot like at Tim Hortons, whatever the case.
Yeah,
dog bites, exactly, all that kind of thing. So that's very important. And look, I mean, a tenant who's going to have tenants insurance is a responsible tenant, the kind of tenant that you want to have. And so it's very helpful to have that tenants insurance in those cases. So I kind of touched on a couple of major areas there pretty quickly, but that's the way to insure you against casualty claims on your property through slip and falls, but also protects you from other tenants in the building who might sue other tenants.
Absolutely. If I can just jump in, I wanted to add two things too, Michael, based on my experience with tenants and lawsuits. The very first thing your insurance company will ask in the event of a lawsuit is they're going to want to see your snow removal logs. So your winter maintenance contractor needs to be keeping logs, which say, when they went out, what was done, what the weather conditions were, how recently it had snowed, all those kinds of things. The insurance companies will want that. The second thing you want to make sure is when you hire someone to do snow removal, make sure that they are a reputable company and that they are carrying insurance themselves, because that's another way as an owner that you can say, we, hired this company to do the snow removal and their insurance ideally would pay out instead of yours in the event that there was an issue. Christian actually added something too. He said being an additional insured is common with commercial tenants. It's hard to get that on a residential tenancy. It can be done, but most insurance agents that do retail insurance don't really know anything about it. And this is one of the big challenges, is that there's a lot of opinions out there when it comes to insurance, but it's really, really hard to find people who actually legitimately know what they're doing and set things up properly. So if you are transferring some of that responsibility onto the tenants, make sure you have a document that you're sharing with them. It's not just, we require tenants insurance, but we require tenants insurance of this type, of this amount, that names us as additional insureds, and whatever other things, like give them a blurb that they can take to their insurance provider and say, I need this to comply with my lease.
I love that. Good idea.
Elizabeth, Christian's right. I mean, if for someone who is just renting a unit inside a multi-tenant building, that's you're probably not going to be able to get the landlord as an additional insured. But if they're renting an entire house or a garden home or a townhouse, something along those lines, then the broker's not going to be surprised in that case, shouldn't be surprised that the landlord wants to be an additional insured in that case. So he is right in some cases, but in the case of a bigger unit, it is available.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's important to keep in mind too is different provinces have different rules under the Residential Tenancy Act. And in Ontario, they stipulate that you cannot make the tenant responsible for the maintenance, for the grass cutting or the snow removal, unless you have a separate contract and you compensate them accordingly. So then you really have a decision on your hands. Do you want to follow, Michael's recommendation and yes, go ahead and make them responsible and pay them something to do it? Or do you want to say, what, I'd rather just make sure that it's done properly and charge more for rent and have the maintenance done yourself? So you actually have two options and you have to decide what's the best in your situation.
Again, different if it's a single house versus a multi-tenant unit. With a single house, you can make them responsible in those cases, but not on a unit inside a multi-tenanted building. Elizabeth, you also talked about things like the inspection logs and that. You're absolutely right. I'm sure people are thinking, well, that seems a little bit much to have to do all of that. And, I can understand why you would have that reaction, but I can absolutely assure you that the judge does expect a commercial property, 100%, they want to have detailed logs. And if it's a multi-tenanted unit, they're expecting logs there as well. They will. That's the standard. That is the standard of care to show that. It's not a best practices. If you don't have it, you're going in with one hand tied behind your back in terms of defending that case. It's expected.
Absolutely.
Also, where like a really good property manager comes in, right? Good property managers will be doing those things for you, right? And a good property manager is worth their weight in gold in terms of protecting yourself from liability in other ways as well, but in terms of protecting yourself from liability. God, I wish you were Elizabeth.
After 15 years as an investor and as a property manager, we've got a few tricks up our sleeves, which reminds me, I meant to ask you guys if you would rent to lawyers or people who are in the legal profession as tenants, as part of your tenant screening, because I'm sorry, I don't.
I can understand why we're a difficult bunch. I can understand that for sure. But
I had a rent to own tenant, and all he did anytime he's like, I'd like this. And if you don't, then I'll sue you. And every time I turned around, all he did was threaten to sue. I'm like, you don't even have grounds. Like, you're just asking for a rent receipt, which you can go and print yourself. Don't threaten to sue me all the time, every day.
Well, you'd also wonder why a lawyer isn't buying their own place as well. Why they don't own their own place. I mean, that probably says they're probably not a very good lawyer if they can't afford to buy a house.
Well, in my experience, and no offense, but in my experience, some of the lawyers, this one in particular had 3 or 4 divorces behind him, which was why he was renting and couldn't own.
Yeah. So he's okay. We're not allowed to use profanity, but he's one of those guys anyway. Right.
I mean, and there's like a few bad apples in every profession, maybe a few
more than a few when it comes to lawyers. I hate lawyers.
Love it.
Michael and I had dinner a few weeks ago where we were like, we would never date another lawyer.
Christian says, fortunately, lawyers are not a protected class under the Ontario Human Rights Code.
Yeah, they'll probably work on that.
And Christian does rent to lawyers, but they can be difficult.
No doubt.
Milena, did you have anything you want to add? I think we've covered like 3 questions in the last 20 minutes.
No, that was pretty much it, I think.
On the insurance side, if I may, so when you get insurance on your property that you rent to others, make sure you get guaranteed replacement cost on building. The reason for that, everyone, is because what that means is, first of all, well, let me tell you, the cost of replacing buildings has gone way up. I don't know if any of you noticed. I mean, the price of lumber, the price of labor, the price of everything has just gone through the roof. With a guaranteed replacement cost endorsement on building, what that means is no matter how much insurance you have, let's say you have $1 million building and you have $500,000 insurance, no matter what it costs to rebuild that $1 million building, which might be $1.5 million now, the insurance company has to pay it. In fact, I've got a case right now where my lady had $500,000 on her home in terms of building replacement cost, and it is $1.5 million to rebuild it. But whether it's $1.5 million or $10 million, because of the guaranteed replacement cost endorsement, they must pay the cost to rebuild the place using new materials, regardless of what the amount of insurance is that she has. So that's very important. If you can't get guaranteed replacement cost endorsement on the building, then make sure that the coverage that you have, the dollar amount, is enough to rebuild the place using today's costs. What does it really cost to rebuild that building now in current dollars? Is it enough? And if not, and you got to look at those renewals every year and think about that when you look at that renewal, do I have enough insurance here? Because you'd hate for your tenant to burn the place down and then you want to go to rebuild it, but you don't have enough to rebuild the building that you had. Just because you didn't get enough insurance to cover it. So make sure you keep an eye on that endorsement and on those dollar values to make sure that they're there. You also want to have coverage so that if you have a loss of rent during the rebuild period, and think about how long does it take to rebuild these places. I can tell you it's longer than you think. I always tell clients, expect a year. Expect a year from the date of fire until the date you can rent the place again. Make sure you have enough insurance to replace all that lost rent during that period. because that way, at least while they're rebuilding and you don't have the tenants in there, you're okay because you got insurance to cover that during that time. Very important. And then also obviously on your third party liability coverage, you know, you want to have at least 2 million. There's good insurers out there that will sell you $1 million in liability coverage, but then you can add on an umbrella policy that bumps up the $1 million on all your properties to 5 million or 4 or 3 or 2, whatever you like. I happen to have 7 because I'm a lawyer, but it's extremely inexpensive to get an umbrella policy that will bump those limits up on all of your policies. You can keep them at $1 million, and then you have that umbrella, and the umbrella just basically says, once that policy is exhausted, that $1 million, I come into play and I cover everything above that. Very inexpensive add-on, and it can be great, because, you know, if your tenant sets your place on fire and then your place burns down the neighborhood, you want to have lots of liability insurance when those neighbors' insurance companies come knocking to get reimbursed for the cost that they've had to pay to rebuild their clients' houses and to replace the contents of those houses. So it's a good idea to have that.
Absolutely. I think it's important for a lot of real estate investors to know here that what a lot of us do when we're starting out is we just call the company that's insuring our principal residence and we go, hey, will you insure my rental property? Most companies will say, yeah, absolutely, no problem. And they'll give you a quote. They'll give you a quote that's probably lower than some of the other companies out there. But the reality is it's a lower quote because it's an inferior quality product. You're not getting all of the types of coverage and the proper valuation that you need as an investor. So you really want to find an insurance broker who specializes in providing the right type of insurance for real estate investors that has all the bells and whistles that Michael's talking about. Milena, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I have something, and then that you brought up that reminded me, and then I have something for Michael as well, a question for Michael. So first I wanted to say about the insurance on our property. So what my husband and I decided to do is that because we consider our rental properties a business, of course, and there's like, you know, a little bit more, you know, money in the account that's like just business money. It kind of made sense to us. What we did in order to mitigate the cost of insurance, all we did is we increased the deductible. And the reason why we did that is because, okay, we're willing to take a risk. You know, if one of our properties has like an event, we'll increase the deductible. It'll cost a little bit more. It's also pre-tax money because it's a business expense. Whereas for our home, we reduced the deductible to a lower amount, or we kept it at a lower amount because that's different. It's our home, right? And we didn't want to use our post-tax dollar to pay a high deductible. So that's also a bit of a business decision, and there are ways of mitigating the cost of insurance by doing those things. But the one thing is we don't try to nickel and dime insurance when it comes to rent coverage, when it comes to our other asset coverage. And I mean, I know it's boring, but like once a year, you have to review your policies and look at, you know, do you have sufficient coverage for the building rebuild? Do you have sufficient coverage for the assets? Maybe things changed, right? During that year, maybe you decided to renovate the property. All of a sudden, it's not the same anymore. Whether, you know, if you decided to put brand new, you know, stainless steel appliances, then it's not going to be the same cost anymore. So that's why it's important to make sure to review those things.
Right, and you know, and also, you know, we had a hurricane in Ottawa, for heaven's sake. They've had them up in Barrie. Like the climate change and the effects that has had on weather. The number of weather-related losses is going up in incredible exponential numbers compared to years gone by. The whole bloody city of Fort McMurray burned to the ground, for heaven's sake, because of climate change and fire. So, you know, it's not a question of if you're going to have a major claim. It's just a question of when it's going to happen. You know, we talk about fires, but in fact, actually water losses are much more common. Water is so ubiquitous, you know, whether it's pipe bursts, neighbors' properties flooding onto your properties, heavy rain, sewer backup, municipal storm systems not functioning properly. You know, water losses are way more common than fire losses are. You know, I worked on a case where we had literally thousands of toilets in Ontario, where these parts that connected the toilet bowl riser to the domestic water supply were made in China for like $1 each, were brought into Canada en masse and used in the installation of toilets in new homes, and they would fail after a couple of years. And then water now flows at like 35 psi out of the municipal water system into these homes, usually the ensuite, because that's the toilet that gets used the most in the house, on the second floor, flooding the entire house and causing huge, huge water losses. So, I mean, that was a product liabilities case that turned into massive water loss claims for homeowners. And so water can be just as destructive as fire is. And those losses are more common. You know, again, with tenants too, I mean, we're all careful in our homes because there are homes and there are pride and joy investments. Not all tenants feel that way, and they're not as careful about it. Dishwashers leaking, clothes washers leaking, bathtubs leaking. I mean, and causing damage to other units. So that, anyway, enough said. But the insurance is important because you will use it, and ironically, when I have clients who have a total loss of a house or a commercial building from fire, in some ways they're actually kind of happy about it because they get built a brand new building using the latest building technologies and materials. It's fantastic. The outcome at the end of the day. I'm not encouraging anybody to set any fires to their places, but my point is that good insurance not only saves you from that potential disaster, but can actually put you back into a good place at the end of the day. If all your units are redone and your building is rebuilt, it can be a real a benefit, actually.
Absolutely. Danielle commented here in the chat box. She said she heard that you can ask to remove the clause about rebuilding at the same address. So in the case of a fire, you could actually rebuild at a more suitable address, which gives an investor more flexibility. That's something that I hadn't heard of before, but that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about that either. You're right. Usually one of the requirements on it is that you rebuild at the same location. It seems that what Danielle's saying is that you can still get replacement cost, but the ability to do it at a different location. And if that's not an expensive endorsement, and oftentimes these little add-ons are very inexpensive, then that's a great idea.
Absolutely.
I'll call my insurance broker tomorrow.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So why don't we've talked a lot about sort of the litigation and the liability portion of it. Why don't we switch to you, Milena, a little bit? And if you can talk a little bit about setting up a corporate structure and what protection that provides for us as real estate investors. How is that helpful for us? When should we be doing that? How do you know when you're big enough? Because a lot of people, when we're starting out in real estate, people are like, why would you spend the money to set up a corporation? Just, buy the first few properties in your personal name and, just try it out and see if it sticks. Well, sometimes when it sticks, it becomes problematic, right?
Okay, well, so despite the fact that we are having a conversation about liability as landlords, ultimately being in the business of real estate is not a very heavy business that incurs a lot of liability. It really isn't. And the liability that as landlords we incur, most of it is covered by insurance, right? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it's not usually when people incorporate it is not for liability reasons, although there is some liability protection with getting incorporated, absolutely. But ultimately, the main reason why people will incorporate or not is to do with taxes and business planning. So, but I feel like that may be a conversation for another day. So I'm going to focus the conversation about how the corporations will protect you from liability. And yes, they will. Ultimately, what a corporation does is if you operate through your corporation instead of in your personal name, you're protecting your personal assets, your home, your investments that are in your personal name or in another corporate name. Everything that you put under the umbrella of that corporation, it's hard for someone suing you or suing that corporation to to come after you personally, which would be called piercing the corporate veil. So that's when an individual that's suing you is coming after you personally and able to come after your personal assets to cover their losses or their damages inside that lawsuit, inside the corporation. So yes, there is some protection. You'll protect yourself from your personal assets, but of course, it's not going to add any protection as far as the business assets are concerned. So you're not going to protect the buildings that that corporation owns from liability or anything like that by incorporating. And what was I going to say as well? The other big factor is, in order to get the proper protection, your corporation needs to actually be properly set up and managed properly on a regular basis. Which means that if you don't have, a minute book and you don't have your resolutions up to date, it does open you up for additional liability. Like a corporation is a good idea, but you have to be set up properly. And another thing to consider, whether to incorporate earlier on in the game or later, while I understand, that you may not want to incur the cost when you're just like, I'm going to try with one property or two and see how that goes. The issue is that when you do want to transfer those properties into your corporation, you've got to pay the land transfer tax again and get refinanced under the corporation, which usually means a lot in legal fees, a lot more than trying to save, a couple $1,000s when you're setting yourself up. A little bit of that is the cost of doing business. So I think, serious investors who are like, I really want to give this a good try and I want to see if it's for me, I'd say either partner up with someone else who's already doing it until you're sure that you want to do it, but then incorporate right off the top if you want that protection. If you do decide to incorporate, do it sooner rather than later so that you can buy those properties through your corporation right away.
Awesome. Thank you. And do you recommend, sort of the like 2-tier structure, or where you have like a couple of different corps, or is one just having one corporation that's holding real estate, is that sufficient protection?
For liability, in an ideal world, to protect yourself completely from liability, you would have one corporation per building. And some investors do that. I mean, usually we're talking very big buildings, but some investors do that. And usually the names of their corp, I don't know if you'll see it sometimes, but if you notice, sometimes we'll have like 123 2nd Street West Inc. That's a corporation that has incorporated for the purpose of managing one building. And they'll incorporate different corporations for each building. And the reason they do that is because that way, if something comes up with one building, it won't affect the assets that are in the other corporations. That's sort of an ideal, but realistically, that's not doable. And now when you're talking about doing a multi-level structure, whether it's like a 2-tier where you have a holding company and then you have your operating company that either owns the building and does the property management, or have 2 separate companies, one for the property management, one for holding the buildings, the more of that you create, usually the more flexibility you have in moving the assets from one to the other to protect from liability. Let me give you an example. So if you have 2 corps, right? One that is the owner of the buildings, and then on top of that, you have a holding company where you move all of the profits. As you make profits, you move them up, right? Then in that case, the profits that you have moved to the top company, as long as the corporation that holds the buildings is managed properly, then you're protecting those profits that you've taken out. You're protecting those from the liability that's inside the corporation that's holding the buildings. And if you have a property management company and a property holdings company under the one holding company, then you're able to pass some of the liability onto the property management company, of course, with proper documents and the proper setup. You can move the liability to the property management company by saying, I'm hiring the property management company to do all of the maintenance and whatnot. So there are ways. But it's not foolproof. It's never foolproof. There are just ways that help protect you from liability.
Interesting. Okay. So to summarize where we've sort of gotten to so far, what I'm hearing is that there are three main things that we can do to mitigate liability or to minimize our liability exposure. So one is hiring good property management. So whether that's ourselves in a corporation that we set up, or whether it's hiring somebody, locally who is going to provide all these services. The second thing is making sure that we have proper insurance. And the third one is incorporating it to whatever size or scale that we need to, but separating our personal assets, our home, our cottage, our boat, our ATVs, separating all of that from our ownership of the property itself. Does that summarize the three main things, or the three best ways we can manage liability?
I think I'd add a fourth, which is to have processes and procedures and keeping detailed records that Michael was talking about.
Okay, that's good.
And I just want to add one other point here about just while we were about the slip and fall items, slip and fall incidences. If you do find out that there's been an incident at one of your properties, slip and fall, fire, an assault, some type of any kind of issue that could conceivably come into an occupier's liability case, you should get over there or get your people over there. But the point is, there was some recording that went on, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. And we all carry around these fantastic digital phones in our pockets, that take these amazing photographs. And those photos worth 1,000 words, as they say. So very helpful to do a little bit of investigation, or get your property manager to do it if you hear about anything that does go on. It's those incidences that you think nothing's going to come of it. It's amazing. People get sued all the time. Well, I got rear-ended, 2 years ago. Yeah, I think I remember that. There wasn't any damage. Well, now the person's claiming they have a brain injury as a result of it. Oh, geez, I never thought anything would come of it. Well, things can come of it down the road. So just a little tip there, a little investigation, a little due diligence if you do hear about anything.
Absolutely. Love that. So that sort of takes us to our final question before we dive in. And there's a number of people who have some great questions here. What do we do if we get served papers for a lawsuit? When I came to you, we'd gotten served with something from Diamond and Diamond.
Well, I would say
whatever credibility they have.
Probably it's going to be something that you're going to hand off to your insurance company, and they will take care of it. But if you have a lawyer friend, or a colleague that you want to pass it by just to see what it's all about, by all means, you're welcome to send it to me. You're welcome to send it to Milena. We both have a standing policy that anybody can call us at any time if they have a quick legal question to kind of get pointed in the right direction. And that's because we don't want people to pick lawyers off of the sides of buses like Diamond and Diamond. They are literally the worst personal injury law firm, in my opinion, that exists. Even though you would think they're the greatest because they spend all this money on advertising. So, if there's a lawyer that talk to them. And if you need a lawyer, if I can help you or Milena can help you, we'll help you. If we're not the right people, we'll get you into the hands of the right person. Don't pick somebody from the yellow pages or from the internet. Pick them through word of mouth, because just like mechanics and restaurants and everything else in our world, there's really great professionals and there's terrible professionals too. And, we will make sure you get into the hands of the right person. But if all else fails, if it is a property or casualty claim against you, your insurance company will probably deal with it, but we're always glad to take a look at it if anything comes in, to make sure that you're given some good initial advice about what to do about it.
Michael, do you think that individuals should deal with the insurance company directly, or should they call a lawyer before they do that?
Milena, it really depends on the case. It really depends. And that's why I say contact one of us first, because, we'll sort of tell you what we think about that. Or we may give you some advice on, okay, so you are going to report this to the insurance company, and here's some advice on what you should be doing as part of the process, to make sure they're doing their job or you're covering your interests, that kind of thing. So, answer would be just talk to us first, and maybe there are definitely many cases where I have where I'm sort of acting for my client even though the insurance company is handling it, I'm keeping a close eye on what they're doing to make sure they're doing their job properly too, for whatever reason, maybe, for whatever the reason may be.
I think too, a lot of people don't realize that when they go to their insurance company, when they signed the policy, when they signed up for it initially, they give the insurance company the right to do whatever they want in terms of dealing with the case. So there may be zero case, but the insurance company might look at it and go, you know what, it's going to cost us more to get the lawyers involved to defend it. So let's just settle it and pay them something to go away. And that now becomes a claim on your record. And then your rates go up. So I love what you guys are saying. I think that is a huge thing. Had I known then what I know now, I would have come to you guys long before I ever went to my insurance company in a number of these cases. Because sometimes it's literally just a letter from our lawyer, I think, that would have made the situation go away. Because what I'm seeing more and more of is a lot of these sort of ambulance chasing type claims where, there's somebody who's been waiting in an emergency room, or there's, somebody at a hospital who's getting paid, somebody comes in with a broken arm and, they act like they're making conversation, but what they're actually doing is giving out cards for these lawyers. And we actually had a case where we had a gentleman who he slipped and fell. He was a known alcoholic. He was in an intoxicated state. He broke his arm, and he filed a claim with one of these, frivolous companies, and they really sold him. They said, we're going to get you some money and you will never have to work again another day, and blah, 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 blah. And the insurance company, he sued on the face of the lawsuit. It said $1 million. And this tenant must have thought he was just, he'd hit the jackpot, and he was so excited. And what they actually got from the insurance company was $25,000. And by the time this lawyer had taken all of their fees, he got $250. So this insurance company did this legal company, law firm, did a complete snow job on him about how much they were going to get him. And basically they used that frivolous claim to be able to justify their existence. So my claims went up, he got nothing, and the only people who made any money were the lawyers. And there is so much of that going on out there. And when you have a class of tenant who is not educated, is not savvy, and doesn't, know that they should do the research and they should look into this and those kinds of things, unfortunately, these types of things are increasing instead of decreasing.
Elizabeth, on the flip side of things, if any of our friends out there do have a major loss at one of their buildings or homes or properties, unfortunately, and I do regret to have to say this, but the reality is that if you've got a major claim yourself in terms of your loss, you unfortunately pretty much need a lawyer.
Yes.
And I can tell you, when I have a case come to me, Milena brought me a case almost 2 years after the fire. This insurance company had not paid anything out to this lady and had totally taken advantage of her lack of sophistication.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have cases where people call me within a week, and I've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in their hands within weeks of the fire.
Yep.
It's unfortunate. You shouldn't have to have a lawyer to make a claim to your insurance company when these things happen. But the reality is that it unfortunately makes a big difference, because they will try to take advantage. They don't want to pay the money, and they say, well, we're your friends and you're in good hands with Allstate and all this kind of nonsense. Well, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately, but we will make sure that it works the way it should be. And the only reason why we do it, or can make it work for you, is because we know what they have to do, and we put them to task of doing what they've got to do and to get it done. Always with that fear of us suing them hanging over their heads if they don't do it right. Not only that, but if they don't process the claims properly, like in the case of this lady who came to us 2 years after the loss, we're suing for millions of dollars in punitive damages on that claim as well, because of how they mistreated her. Yeah. And so, but that's unfortunately what we have to do. So if you have a major loss, again, you can call me, no obligation. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. If it goes well, you can handle it yourself. But if it doesn't go well and you need me, we'll get involved. And believe me, we can make a big difference if they're trying to take advantage of you.
I actually had
Absolutely.
another client that I referred to Michael. It was a case where the couple had separated a few months after separation. While we were trying to deal with their separation, their place burned down, and I had Michael take a look at the proposed settlement from the insurance company with that they received within like a week. Michael was like, "Yeah, take it. It's good." And like that was it, right? And so and what in my experience working with Michael for the last several years is that Michael is kind of like, and don't hate me for saying this, Michael, but kind of like a really, really good real estate agent in the sense that if you try to sell your property yourself on Kijiji, you'll probably get a lot less than how much you're going to get if you sell it with a really good real estate agent. Even though you're going to pay them a fee to do it, you'll still have more money in your pocket. So that's kind of like that, because when Michael and I met, I had been approached, and I have no qualms saying that because I'm not a litigation lawyer, but I was approached by a boy he was at the time a boy, he's now a man, it's been years, but he was injured at his school, and a serious injury. And the insurance company, seeing me come a mile away, oh, this like little lawyer who knows nothing about, a personal injury, which I absolutely was, oh, here, we'll offer her like 35,000 or to my client. I brought it to them and they were like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then I met with Michael like the next day. I hadn't even answered the offer, even though my client had accepted it. Like with me, I met with Michael. He's like, don't you dare, that's $1 million claim right there. And so yeah, so Michael's still working on it, but yeah, like that was a lifesaver because I didn't know I would have accepted it. So
we just need 2 more zeros on their number and we're done. I keep telling them that. 2 more zeros, that's all we need.
Yeah.
I think that highlights, Milena, so well the importance of when you're building a power team as a real estate investor, you really want to surround yourself with the best possible people, the people who have the experience, who have the knowledge, and can support you even when you don't, and it's worth paying for it.
Exactly.
Danielle said here, as commercial landlords, we are an easy target for shakedowns. In so many words, any lawyer can say 20,000 or I will sue you. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so
professional that makes money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we don't have much time left, but we do have a bunch of questions. So if you guys don't mind, let's jump over quickly. Aaron asked, how do you manage liability for short-term rentals? I think, unless you guys have anything to add, my thoughts would be the property management, the insurance, and the incorporations with the processes, procedures, and detailed records would absolutely be, whether it's a short-term rental or a long-term rental, that's where your biggest protection is going to come from, Aaron.
The beauty of short-term rentals, we have a few. The beauty of it is that you have someone going in all the time. So make sure that the person who goes in to clean in between guests also keeps an eye on the things that they need to keep an eye on. Maybe make them a checklist, an easy one that they can just check boxes to say, I verified all these things. And so another thing too, be blatantly honest with your insurance company. They need to know that it's a short-term rental. They need to know when it's vacant. You need to know how long it can be vacant without you having to do anything, or what happens if it is vacant during a certain period of time. What do we need to do? Do we need to go check every day, every week? Like what are the processes to make sure that the insurance has nothing to say if a claim comes about? So that's
well, and you're not going to be able to get tenants insurance likely in that situation for the client. So, you may not, but you do charge a bit of a premium for those short-term clients anyway, right? So you kind of make up you get some compensation for your risk that way a bit.
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you. Christian has this fantastic, like super detailed question, which I think we'll circle back at the end and ask. Someone else said, I own a townhouse. The condo board has insurance that covers slip and fall. Should I update my landlord insurance to cover the same?
So in that case, the condo board would be the owner of the common elements. And so they would be the party that would be sued if there was a slip and fall on the common elements at the condo. But that would not necessarily protect if there was a slip and fall inside the condo unit. And then there's these gray areas, of course, which lawyers create where they're sort of, are there co-occupiers, so technically the condo board's supposed to be responsible for the walkway that goes right up to your front door, for snow clearing that, but then it's also really only used to access your unit. And so therefore you're kind of co-occupiers of that area. Fact is your insurance that you have on your condo unit would provide liability protection if you get sued, even on a common element or even on a co-occupied area, or whether it's inside your unit, you're going to be covered no matter what in that case.
Perfect. Okay, so there's no need to double insure.
No, that's right. You do not need to insure the common elements. You already are okay, because you are kind of double insured. You've got the insurance that the condo corp has on the common elements. You've got your insurance on your unit, which does extend beyond the unit if you get sued on one of those co-occupier areas.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. What happens if a tenant cancels their insurance, and who's liable?
Well, if you're named insured under the policy, then you will get notice of that, or you're supposed to, although I wouldn't rely on that because it's not a perfect system. So that's why in your lease, you're gonna stipulate that they're to provide you with a copy of the insurance policy each year when it's renewed. Okay. And if your lease requires them to have tenants insurance and they've canceled their tenants insurance, then they're in breach of contract because they've agreed to have the tenants insurance in place, and you can terminate the lease on that basis.
So in Ontario, you'd file an N5, which is notice to terminate lease or breach of lease. And I would recommend hiring a paralegal, because N5s are super complicated. So you want to, in that case, you want to hire another legal professional. You want to hire a paralegal who has a lot of experience at the landlord tenant board, and get that help right from the beginning, because there are so many landlords in Ontario right now who their claims, regardless of how valid they are being thrown out on these really minuscule technicalities.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why they would want to do that, because I mean, you may want to talk to them if they're the kind of people you can talk to and say, look, it's important for you to have this. If the house were to burn down, you'd lose all your stuff. If you were to cause the house to burn down, then you're going to get sued for that, and you'll have to declare bankruptcy over the whole thing. Like, the insurance just isn't there, for fun or to help us as the landlord. It's there predominantly to help you as the tenant. It protects you against legal liability, not just related to the house, but anywhere in the world for any legal liability that you may have, other than for motor vehicle accident. Those are exempt. It's important for you to have those things. Tenants insurance is pretty inexpensive, but it's important to have for the legal liability and to protect your stuff. So it's not make a lot of sense to cancel it when it's so cheap.
Yeah, I think in that case, and I certainly find with my tenants, a lot of it is about education and helping them understand what the policy actually is and how it protects them. Because most people are like, well, it costs me $15 a month. Why would I do it? Well, here are all the reasons why. We actually have a partnership with a local insurance provider in town. And so we make sure we make it really clear, and we make it really easy. We're like, this is the reason why we require this in our lease. These are the reasons why. Reach out to this company, and they'll be happy to provide you a no obligation quote.
Right. And it literally is, $20 a month. Like, it's very inexpensive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Is there a number of properties that you need to have in order to make setting up a property management company, in order to make it active?
Like a minimum number?
That's what it sounds like. Napal is asking, is there a number of properties you need to have to set up a property management company and make it active? So it's not the number of properties that make a company considered active.
That's right. It's the type of income. So when we're talking about active income rather than passive income, it's what CRA looks at from the angle of, like, how is the income generated? Is the income generated from an asset, or is the income generated from work? If the income is generated from activities and work, it's active income. If it's generated from an asset, then it's passive income, like an investment or a property. So that's why it's good to have a property management company for tax purposes. And I don't want to get into a lot of details here, but because I think it's the conversation for another webinar. But a property manager being active income, it's a great tool for tax planning. But I think for liability protection, it helps as well, because you can pass the liability to a company. The property management company would not have that much money and that many assets in it. That's where it gets really advantageous to use, because if you can push all your liability to your property management company, makes, you know, 20, 30 grand a year, no more than 30 grand a year, because you don't want to charge HST to yourself, then keep it, you put all the liability in that company. That's like a small company, and then you keep your building separate. But it is limited what you can do in terms of liability protection. That way it's not going to protect you 100%, but it does add some protection.
Perfect. Thank you, Milena. Okay, so Christian's last question here. So some lawyers suggest that we hold individual assets or groups of assets within individual corporations, while others have suggested that this provides limited protection and you may as well use one real estate holding company for all of your assets. The principle of alter ego is sometimes cited. Related to this, is that in reality that unless you use someone like a lawyer as the director of the company, any company group can be searched and see common directors? How much debate is there really among the legal community on one way versus the other?
That's a lot of different concepts in one question. Okay, so
Christian's a very smart man.
I see that. Okay, so when you're talking about alter ego, you're talking about a trust, if I'm understanding correctly. So basically what you're suggesting is that, and I know some lawyers will advance this as an option, is basically the only director of the company is the lawyer, but the lawyer is only acting as a trustee for the actual owners of the company, which remains silent. And the reason why we do that is that if someone searches the company, they'll see that the lawyer is the only director. And because the shareholders don't have to be declared except on your tax returns, which is not public, then it allows to keep that division between the actual owner of the company and the company itself. And I mean, it is a possibility. You can do that. And then the question is, can you pierce that and go to the actual owners of the company? It's a little tricky. It's basically protected by solicitor-client privilege. That's where that protection comes in. I think it might be a little bit expensive to maintain. I know that as a lawyer, if I'm shouldering all that liability, I'm in charge for that. But it is doable. And then you're talking about using different corporations rather than just one. So that's, I think, something that I touched on. I know it was after you posted your question, so I don't know if I've answered that to your satisfaction, but basically by having multiple corporations with different assets in different corporations, there's an advantage in terms of liability, because if there's a claim that's related to one of the buildings in Corporation A, it's not going to be able to go and target the assets that are in Corporation B, whether it's investments or whatnot. I can give you a good example. So my husband and I, we have actual property holdings where we own properties inside a corporation, and then we have another corporation for any other types of investments. So we also will lend, like we'll do private lending, that we keep separate. And the reason is because there's very tiny itty bitty bit of liability when it comes to lending private money. Your only risk really is to lose your investment. Whereas if you're investing in a building, like a building shoulders more liability. So the main reason we split the two was for liability purposes, because from a tax perspective, there's no real advantage to separating the two, because they're both passive income. So that's where that comes in, that you can protect some of your investments from liability by separating into different companies. There's also some planning advantages to do that as well. Yeah. I think Christian added something. Alter ego is where the court determines that your corporation is working wholly for your personal self, and therefore it is not truly an independent corporation. Hence, it is a form of piercing the corporate veil. So I guess to an extent that could be the case, and that's where I think maybe the property management company, if it only serves the purpose of managing your properties for the purpose of separating the liability, then maybe that would be something to look into. I'd have to do some research to find out if that has been the case in the past. But I don't think it would be considered piercing the corporate veil if you run your properties out of a corporation.
Okay.
That to me would be different if you're separating, you know, your income from your everyday job from your business that you run as a corporation. Otherwise, they would pierce the corporate veil all the time, and piercing the corporate veil is actually pretty hard.
Yeah. Wow,
Well,
that's a lot for 8:30 on a Monday evening. Yeah, and Christian said you did a good job. So awesome, way to go, Milena. There was just one more question. Somebody asked if it was important to have detailed logs for duplexes and triplexes. Absolutely. What you really want to do in order to make your real estate business scalable, and this is what I work with a lot of my coaching clients on, is you want to set up systems and processes from the beginning so that as you add each property to your portfolio, it's not a tremendous burden. You're not having to redo things. You're not having to create things. You want these systems and processes in place from the beginning. And one of the questions you want to ask yourself is, does it make sense if I do it? Like, for example, if you say, okay, well, I'm not going to hire someone to do the snow removal, I'm going to do it myself. Well, when you have one rental property, yeah, you can do it yourself. Does it make sense if you have 10 rental properties? Nah, not really. What about if you have 100? Definitely not. You can't get there fast enough after a snowfall if you're doing the snow removal for 100 rental properties. So that's kind of the litmus test for, as you're setting up systems and processes, what is setting you up for success and enabling you to grow quickly and aggressively, and what is actually you not getting out of your own way and basically not wanting to invest the money and having proper professionals take care of the various areas of responsibility for you. So should you be doing all these things for just a duplex or a triplex? Yes, absolutely. Because ideally you're not stopping at a duplex or a triplex. That's just your first property. Put the time and energy into setting up your systems and processes when you're starting it out. Okay, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time here. You guys have been fantastic this evening. Thank you so much for your time and for attending. I just have a couple of things here for our wrap up together. There we go. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. We have the Canadian Real Estate Investor Financing, 7 Secrets to getting all the money you want. So Dalia Barsoum has generously given us a copy of her fantastic book. If you are just starting out as a real estate investor, this is absolutely a great tool for you to helping you understand how financing works, how you can prepare yourself for financing, what you need to know about scaling and growing your portfolio from a financing perspective. So Michael, since this is your first time on one of my webinars, can you pick a number between 1 and 40, please? And that person will be contacted by the fantastic Mary Beth, my virtual assistant, and she'll be arranging shipping for whoever is entrant to the webinar between 1 and 40.
23.
23 it is. All right. So for those of you, stay tuned to your email tomorrow when Mary Beth will reach out. And here is where you can find us. So myself, of course, I'm Elizabeth Kelly, and then you've got information and Michael's contact information. And I enjoyed this evening so much. You're both such a wealth of information, and this was absolutely such a pleasure to have you both here.
Nice to be here, and I wish all of your colleagues, everyone out there, great success and wealth and prosperity, and all the best. Very nice to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who maybe missed parts of this, or were not able to attend the beginning, or would like to watch this again, there will be a recording sent out in the email towards the end of the week once it's all edited and put together. My next webinar, my next big Monday evening webinar, will be Monday, October the 18th, and it's going to be with Quentin D'Souza and Andrew Brennan, and it's called Creating Unforgettable Partnership Opportunities. the ins and outs of joint venture partnerships. So for those of you who maybe are maxed out on financing, or maybe are finding you're encountering some challenges and would like to be either the active partner or the money partner, you don't want to miss this webinar, because we'll be covering a lot of the basics in terms of how do you find people, how do you make partnerships work. We'll be talking a little bit about liability and how we protect ourselves, because we couldn't let that go unsaid. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. So glad you guys enjoyed it. It's always my pleasure to provide value and give back to the community that has given me so much over the years. Thank you to both of my guests. It's such a pleasure to be able to spend more time with you. We're honored that you shared your knowledge and expertise. You guys have an awesome September. I will look forward to seeing you again in October. Take care, guys. All the best.